I need to develop a product for this market. I need to help everyday Australians make a choice. Right? And the choice is, you don't have to choose resi or commercial. You can have both. And you can make a choice starting out whether you want residential or commercial, right? And you should have that choice, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what drives me today. Welcome to another episode of Beat the Market. Welcome to the first episode of Beat the Market. What is this podcast about? This podcast is about bringing you the latest tips and techniques on how to beat the market. My name is Helen Tarrant, and I help everyday Australians become wealthy through commercial property investment. Now, through my contacts with clients and students, I've been helping people to invest, everyday Australians to invest in commercial property since 2016. Now, through that time, I've found everyone's looking for that unique piece of information, advice to beat the market. Sometimes you're just a starting out investor. Some people are sophisticated investors. You might be in your own business, or you might be a high-level professional or a PAYG wage earner. Wherever you are always looking for that unique piece of advice. And I found that it actually takes many people, kind of like raising children, right? A village, right? This is a village of people helping you to raise the bar and beat the market. It means that we're interviewing people from all walks of life, whether they're coming from the business field, the marketing field, the investment field, to just help you broaden the horizon on how you can beat the market. And I'm joined here today by my co-host, Joe. Joe, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're passionate about.
Well, it's great to be here and great to be part of this podcast. My name is Joe Gendy. I'm the managing partner of Sapphire Bay Partners, and we're a boutique accounting firm that specialises in asset holding and wealth structuring. And, this is a really exciting podcast for me because, seeing people succeed and achieve financial freedoms is one of the things that I'm most passionate about. And being able to bring different perspectives and helping people to do that is something that I'm really excited to bring to this podcast and to our audience. So with that, I'm really looking forward to actually both this session and the sessions we've got planned, and a number of the guests that are coming up who are going to look at a number of different ways which you can help and earn and achieve financial freedom.
So from a top line level, what do you do day to day?
So day to day, there's probably two parts to our job. There's the main one I would say is the structuring and helping people, especially as they begin to grow their wealth, to hold on to that wealth and to maintain that. And then in addition, we have many of the other accounting functions. And then finally is helping with some commercial advisory, whether that's assessing properties or different business opportunities. That's some of the stuff that we do, and it probably runs the gambit. But definitely the things that interest me most is helping people to grow their wealth and to be able to hold on to it. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you based?
Yep, so we're based in Melbourne. I've set it up now, I think we're about 4 years running now. Originally, prior to that, I actually had worked in a number of different roles. Started off as PwC, worked in the US for 4 years, worked in London for 4 years, got an MBA as well, helped with commercial advisory with a number of the big firms. And then that's brought me to where I am now and given me a really good rounding in terms of skills, both in terms of accounting and financial, but also commercial assessment and everything you've got to do from that perspective.
How did you start out? So what made you one day wake up and said, I want to be an accountant?
Well,
or more likely, more of a structuring and wealth protection, asset protection, all of that specialist. I wanted to do that. Do you just wake up and go, yeah, one day I wanted to do that?
Well, not quite. Well, I did, one day, I after school I got a commerce law degree, and I was really fortunate to get a role at PwC. And within that group, they had a specialist team within the company, which really focused on helping all the large multinational structure their investments going in and out of whatever country they're based into. And that's probably where I really first sank my teeth into that, and I definitely enjoyed that. And then I think I've always just had a love of M&A, and so my role after I got my MBA was to go and to help companies acquire other businesses or launch onto the stock exchange. So there's been a lot of commercial grounding from that perspective, and now actually this role is almost perfect for me because I'm able to bring all of that into one skill offering, and so it's just been, I've really enjoyed that, and it's been great to be able to help people who aren't the multinationals, but people who really want to become sophisticated investors. They want to achieve financial freedom in their lives, and being able to help them in that journey is something that I've really enjoyed.
So you started your career doing commerce and law. What made you choose commerce and law?
Yeah, so I think I'd had previous experiences within the legal field, and I was really interested in it. And my grandfather was actually a lawyer, and I got to spend a little bit of time working here, and I was just fascinated with it. And to be honest, actually, I'd done some work experience within the courts and with some barristers, and I really loved it. And then, thankfully, I'd actually worked really hard in high school and was able to get in, and it just went from there. And then the commerce was also a no-brainer. It was being able to understand numbers is really helpful in the business world, and having that experience was, it just made for a very good combination.
So would you want to have been a litigator in another world?
There was a time when definitely I wanted to be a barrister. I remember I was in the court one day, and watching them question witnesses, I thought it was just so compelling. I really loved watching it, and that was probably my first taste and what really got me interested in potentially doing more.
And then the pivot happened. You went into account. So is that because of PwC?
Yeah, that was definitely. I mean, it was a really great opportunity, and from that perspective, it was a really good pivot in that regard. Sometimes you just wake up and find that something really appeals to you, and having that opportunity to be able to use both skill sets, I think, was the big draw card that began my road down to commercial structuring. And
when you say commercial structuring, that's how to structure a business, not so much in the commercial property space.
That's right, yes.
So we just wanted to clarify that, because I'm in the commercial property space, and people say commercial structuring, that's actually about businesses.
Yeah, or call it corporate structuring if you like, about how you're going to set it up, exactly, yeah.
So work experience as in a barrister's chair, could have been a litigator, and decided to pivot to mergers and acquisitions, and was with PwC. What was life like before law school?
Yeah, so we grew up in a very tight immigrant family, and my parents came over when I was actually quite young, and we just had a very close-knit family, and it was very much around being together, and I was actually, from that perspective, really fortunate, and we got given a lot of chances and opportunities. And
what did your parents do?
My dad was an accountant. My mum was also an accountant, but she worked a different, back in our home country, but she actually worked in a different field when we got here. And actually that was one of the things that really compelled me, so that, when we were young, my parents worked really hard. My mum was working actually on a manufacturing line. My dad was busy trying to set up his practice and grow it from the handful of clients that we had when he first started. So, and it's actually seeing that example and seeing how he was able to build it, something that I always want to help others do, and that's probably where I get a lot of the reward from my job.
Your father's there to really guide you in all the ways that not to applaud the ways you've done right, but to guide you on the ways that you've failed and done wrong.
No, he's been really great, and he set a really great example, and been very helpful in my career. And I think what I've actually been able to bring on account of it, because obviously, as I mentioned, I completed the MBA, and one of the things that was really helpful from that regard was being able to apply a commercial lens. What people often say to me about accountants is that they're all about the numbers, and there's not really too much else that they focus on. Being able to apply the commercial lens is something that probably distinguishes us as a firm, and something that I've been able to bring, simply because we can assess, does this make sense commercially? Is this going to make you better off? And then work out how to reduce the tax, how the best way to hold it, etc., etc. And, being able to provide that holistic assessment is something that we really value.
So we now know history, right? First generation migrant?
Yes.
First generation migrant migrated to Melbourne from
Egypt.
And you've got any siblings?
Yes, I've got 2.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest. Yeah.
You're the oldest, of course. And so I grew up, and Dad set up his own firm.
Yep.
Around his accountancy firm.
Exactly.
And did you work for him for a bit as you were growing up?
A little bit. Like we had work every now and again, but a lot of my time was really focused on my own schooling and actually helping out, looking after my brother and sister when they were out working.
Yeah.
So, which I know you know a bit about.
Yeah. And then went to uni, did Comm Law, chose Comm Law.
Chose Comm Law.
Yeah, as a first preference.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Got in, yeah.
And then went and did PwC as part of after law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where that pivot came to mergers acquisitions, working overseas,
Exactly.
and then coming back to Australia. Does it feel a little bit? How does it feel coming back to Australia after you've been to London and worked in the US?
Australia is one of the best countries in the world. I mean, I live here, absolutely out of choice. We're so fortunate, and as amazing as those experiences are and the opportunities you get, it really is a wonderful country, and I'm glad to be back. Yeah.
And then set up your own firm, leaving PwC, coming to set up your own firm about 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what's your typical clientele? What do they want out of the services that you provide?
Yeah, so there's a few things. So our typical clientele are usually businesses or investors of some description or a combination of both. And what they're looking for is really help in being able to structure their holdings. And obviously paying less taxes absolutely forefront of what they want to do, but also a lot of them, especially as they become wealthier and wealthier, they're thinking about succession and legacy and what to do, and so that's really important to a lot of our clients to make sure that they've got that right, so that not only do they do well for themselves and achieve freedom, but they leave a legacy and the right sort of legacy that they want. So that's a bit about me. I'd love to hear more about you. Now, I know you also have a commerce law degree.
Yeah, I do actually. It's probably hidden. Most people have to dig fairly deep to actually find it. But the story behind that is first generation migrant out of China, and there's only a few acceptable professions you can be in, and law was one of those. But I was a terrible student because at age 7 coming here, not speaking English, my mother had $70 on her. We were pretty much learning to live. I changed schools 9 times. My parents didn't understand about schooling. They never went to a parent-teacher. In fact, they went to one parent-teacher interview, and Dad basically said, they all said nice things about you, so I'm never needing to attend this ever again. And he never did. And so it was, they kind of just left it to me to figure out, because I've got to figure out how to live and put food on the table and everything else. They've come through the Cultural Revolution. Mum was a bookkeeper. Couldn't really do that trade. They didn't really speak a lot of English. Dad was an electrician, changed to become a baker here, and that's purely because his friend started working in a Baker's Delight franchise and then ultimately bought that franchise, and then Dad ended up working there as a baker, and from there Dad then worked for Coles. So not really that same trajectory, and they had no idea what I was meant to do. So I kind of feel like I raised my parents in half a sense. Then I got into, and then when it came to end of high school, I was like, well, what is it that you do? And I thought, well, yeah, I kind of like business. I kind of like a few things. Never really had huge amounts of work experience here or there, except for working. I was working 3 jobs when I sat the HSC, because I needed to help my parents put food on the table. So at this point I thought, look, I'm just going to put 3 of these preferences up, and one of those happened to be commerce, and I didn't even know I liked it. And I ended up with my 3rd preference, which was commerce. And then I went in there and I was like, well, what do I do here? And then I started to ask the question of all the other Chinese students, what is the number 1 degree you need to do to make your parents proud? Mm-hmm. Like, I was in uni first semester and I was asking this question, and they're like, obviously you have to do Comm Law, right? So I said, oh, great, I'm going to go to law school. And that was the decision of going to law school. And they basically looked at me and went, what is like this? Like, they basically had the same answer to say, well, darling, you aren't smart enough to go to law school because, like, can't you see the people that studied really hard to go to law school? I'm like, there must be a way, right? And it came about that way because my father didn't know much about basically professions, but he said to me, I was on the train one day and I saw this girl and he had this pile of books, and they probably was law books, and I felt really, really proud for her parents. And I said, well, Dad, I guess I'm going to make that decision to go to law school, right? Especially at school when they told me, especially at uni, they told me that Comm Law was the degree to do, and you just said that made you feel really proud, so therefore I must go and do Comm Law. And so for the next couple of years, I spent my time and working towards getting the transfer into Comm Law, and that's how I ended up doing commerce and law. Ended up finishing the degree, but I'd always wanted to do business instead of commerce because I wanted to see it in reality. And at 22, I started my own salon, and the reason I started my own salon was like, I'm learning this knowledge, right? And I want to implement it in real life, but I might actually fail at this. So my idea was that I would go and choose somewhere that was 45 to an hour drive from home, away from all of my peers, and then I would start a business. Because if I failed, no one would know, right? And that's how I started my first beauty salon. And from there, I kind of figured out how to try to implement all of the things that you're learning at uni into practice. Some of them did well, some of them failed spectacularly. But that's really the story of why or how I got into Comm Law.
So you went and started your own salon. What did you think you learned? What were some of the key learnings that you had from starting that business?
I started my salon while I was in law school, probably the last 18 months of law school.
Yeah.
So I would do my full days at the salon, and then I would drive across town to night classes. And I would read about marketing, and I would read about like all the stuff to do with copywriting and marketing and websites and all the stuff in between my appointments in the while I was at the salon. I started it because I wanted to see the things that whether those things they told you in business class really was true, right? So implementing ideas of referral programs, implementing ideas of when you hire staff, and we had accounting classes where they said, this is the BAS, this is the tax, this is all of that, and really seeing that in real life. The first year I was like feeling like I'm drowning because I'm trying to work through all of these things that I didn't understand and learning. And of course learning the trade because I wasn't a beauty therapist as well.
Wow.
Well, you would just buy a salon because you weren't a beauty therapist. So I thought because you come from business school and commerce that you buy a business and you run the business. I never thought I would be a practitioner.
Yeah.
And I learned that in the beauty trade, you've got to be a practitioner as well.
Wow. Yep.
So I went back to beauty school and learned to be a practitioner after I started a salon.
And when you started it, how did you know that you needed to really build the revenue and get that going? Like, what sort of background did you have, or anything from your childhood that you knew? First things first, I've got to sell and copyright and market.
Well, the rent was $400 a week.
Yeah, so you had to sell. Yeah.
And when I was working 3 jobs and helping my parents put food on the table and pay rent, I figured the first thing was to pay rent, right? So you kind of figured out that if $400 a week was the rent, you've got to make $400 before anything else, right? Then you kind of figure out, all right, well, I'm going to need supplies, right? The wax pot, but with the wax that goes in it, all of the things that you start to realize, it isn't just someone coming in and you're waxing their legs and then that's it, right? There's actually a lot to go into it. And it got to a point when I've had the salon for a few years, I say to my clients, well, the waxing is $30, right? But it's $2 for the product, right? And $28 to make you laugh. Right? Or make you bond and make you have a good experience, right? And that's really the essence of when you look at beauty therapy, what that is, right? It's about women feeling good about themselves, right? And really that the product itself is the price of that product is irrelevant to the experience they have, right?
Got it. And was it you were doing the bulk of the work? You said you were the practitioner as well. Did you bring other people in? How did you grow it?
I was 22 when I started the salon, and I hired someone because I thought, well, that's what you do, because I was looking at business from the textbooks, not from the practitioner point of view, right? I was hiring, and from that point of view, you just hire someone who's a beauty therapist. Obviously, you run the business. I mean, I sucked at running the business because it was my first business, except I also didn't understand the dynamics of her being older than me, feeling like that, you know, someone who didn't know anything about anything was trying to be her boss. And those dynamics you don't learn until you're actually in a business. And she would have sick days here and there, and that would impact on the income, right? So then one time she just decided that she was going to be sick for 7 days, right? And I was like, well, I was in beauty school.
Wow.
I had just learned how to wax an eyebrow. I might as well start doing it in the salon, right? The best thing she did was be sick for a week, because by the end of that week, I was so proficient in practical, in beauty, because I had started learning how to be a beauty therapist, but never actioned it, right? So this is the rare case where I learned how to wax an eyebrow just the day before, and then going into the salon and going, hey, let's go.
Amazing. And I mean, it's a really good insight, because many people go in and try to run a business as themselves, the practitioner, losing sight, whereas you've gone in and seen the business as a whole and tried to build that up. And, you know, it sounds like you had some really great insight to begin with. What ended up happening with the business?
So it was a really interesting time, because for me, I'd come from always growing. I think I was always just ambitious about growing things. So I had, from after learning to be a practitioner, having that staff member, then bringing on a manager, trying to sort of work through this process. The manager ended up screwing me over, taking up some of my clients, had to rebuild that business again. Look, yeah, glad it happened when you're in your 20s, right? When you have plenty of energy, you don't need to sleep, right? And so learned a lot of lessons, had that salon, then was crazy enough to decide that you want to have a second salon, right? Because no idea, never been to business coaching or anything. I just decided
a second location.
Let's have a second location, because
nice.
It just made sense, right? I don't know why. Then I didn't realize that you had to go between the two salons, and that was a lot of time, because the traffic and here, and then trying to meet appointments, trying to manage staff, and how much that caused, right? Then from there, thought it'd be really great to also try out different markets, right? Because I really had no concepts of these things. So, you know, we should have a beauty store at a market, kind of like Victorian markets back in there. So for me, it was Parklea markets here, and have a store there on the weekend, right? Because, you know, who needs time to yourself? You could just fill up your whole days with stuff. So I was running between these three things, and basically then realizing that I was coming to the end of my law, and I did that in the first couple of years. And I was coming to the end of my law degree, and it's like, look, I need to take a break, because I can't do law and run three salons. Like, it's just crazy. So then I had to go to my father and say, I'm going to take a break from law school.
Wow. That would have been scary.
But, and he'd obviously knew I was being a beauty therapist all this time. But taking a break from law school was like probably the hardest thing to say to him.
That would be a huge deal.
Yeah. And he said to me, he will, not me, he will personally regret it for the rest of his life if I don't finish law school.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That was his response. And I was like, wow, hopefully my father doesn't get run over by a bus or anything in the next year while I put this business together, kind of thing. And but I said to Dad, I said, look, I will promise you I will finish my law degree. Like, no matter what, I will finish that law degree, right? So that was, so I did take a year off. Had to restructure, because obviously my manager, did a few dodgy things, had to put new systems. I got rid of a salon and sort of, so try to downsize and work through it, right? Move premises, like all of that stuff during that time. So it was just learning.
It sounds like an incredible journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, there was many steps, but I was, my first salon, I was working as a beauty therapist, and I met Bill. Bill was the owner of the building, and he knew nothing about leases or anything. And when you're in law school, you learn these things about leases and contracts and things like that, and you realize that you actually have no lease. and you need to get a lease. So I'm chasing around Bill and said, hey, Bill, you need to give me a lease. And he said, he's about 80 and says, oh, look, don't worry about it, just pay your rent. I collect $400 from you every week and I'm happy and you get to keep it working here. Right. So I felt really strange chasing him and trying to explain to him what a lease is. Then I realised that Bill will come in every week and collect the rent from me, from the hairdresser, from the massage therapist in the room behind me, and then go upstairs, collect the rent from the 2-bedroom unit and go off either fishing or tinkering in his shed behind the property. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good life, right? It seems like he's retired. I mean, he is 80, but I was like, that seems to be, I'm thinking like, here's his bag of money. Like, I've worked like a day or 2 days to give you this $400 and I've seen the hairdresser on their feet. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, so in my head I was like, so this is the landlord, here's his bag of money and he's off like sailing onto the sunset. And mind you, I'm in my 20s, so like this is very visual. And I'm doing waxing, I'm doing facials, and I'm for all of the other business owners along the strip. So I know they're hardworking. I know that they pay their rent. I know that they haven't defaulted. I know that what they've improved on the business. I know what a business they've built. And I'm thinking, actually, you know what? I actually want to be on the other side because these look like pretty good tenants, right? Because you get to talk to the sushi owner, you get to talk to the news agency, you get to talk to the dentist down the road. Yeah, they're pretty good, right? Yeah. So what's this thing about commercial property? And it got me thinking about commercial property. I started to look into it. And as you know, being a migrant child, you're kind of responsible for your parents' retirement. And I'm an only child, so therefore they stuck with me until one of us dies, and that's how it works, right? So I started try to learn as much as I can about commercial property. There was no books and there was no information out there, and the only one I could find were from the US, and their tax system and their everything was different. It's different, right? It's very different. So it doesn't apply to Australia. Right? So I come to this point where I'd been in the salon, I grew the salon to 3 salons, was scaled back, went back to law school, finished law school, and then went, okay, now I can be a lawyer, or I could be, continue to be a beauty therapist. It was never my calling to be a beauty therapist, I just kind of fell into it, right? So I thought, okay, so what do I do next? And how do I take care of my parents in retirement became the big question, because I could see this thing falling off a cliff. I could just see this freight train coming along. And it was like, they're not getting any younger. And every year I can see this burden just growing on me, and that eventually I'm going to have to inherit this, right? And as every migrant child knows, that this is their gift. And so I was trying to find something that could actually help someone retire, not in 10 years, but in like 3 or 5 years. That was what I was looking for.
Amazing. And then that's when you bought your first commercial property. And I think there was a bit of a story about you managing to just make it in time for that property.
Yeah, I think I have a big belief that every commercial property that whether you're inclined into or yourself, you have to fight for it. And today we still do. I had always, coming back from the migrant family, they don't believe in shares. So I don't understand shares. I just don't. But all they say was, go and buy land, right? Coming from China, the land, they've never owned land, right? So it's like land, feel, touch. Exactly. You have to see it, right? Yeah, that's what it is. So it was property, right? So I bought property, I bought residential. I did exactly what I said, bought residential while I was working in the salon. So I worked in the salon, I used that, I bought property. I bought property and came to a point where I had 3 residential properties, and I was like, well, hold on. I'm clearing $50, $100 a week. That's not going to be enough. Like, I've got 3 now. That's not going to be enough to service my parents' retirement, right? And I was thinking, okay, there needs to be something else. And I was at this point where I had some equity. I had the salon. I had then branched out to another business. I ran my own RTO, so Registered Training Organisation, who taught the diploma of beauty therapy. So I was teaching beauty in the off hours of the salon. And then I was like, well, I'm ready for my next purchase in terms of a property. So what do I invest in? And it was like, well, if I did resi again, I can't see how adding an extra $50 is going to really help this need to retire, right? So I started looking for something else, and I came across commercial property, right? Because it was in that property space. I was just looking for property. Came across commercial property, and I couldn't understand. This is the same way my clients can't understand today, the cash flow. I was like, how did someone not tell you about this cash flow? And it was a very closed off society. I mean, this was 2012, right? 2012, people didn't talk about commercial property. They didn't know. If you were a high level professional, you knew about it, you bought your own premise, you did all this stuff, but
it's the world of the sophisticated investor.
And there was me, a migrant kid, trying to figure out how to buy your first commercial property. And it was $360,000. I could have bought the 1-bedroom apartment in Sydney, but I decided to buy this commercial property. And I talked to the agent, who thought, well, obviously this woman knows nothing about commercial property, right? She's a beauty therapist, for God's sake. Like, the thing is, when I tell people, what do you do? I'm a beauty therapist. They just go, right,
got it.
Yeah. I have clients like that. I have clients who say to me, agents won't return my phone calls because I tell them I run a toy store. What she doesn't declare to them is that toy store actually turns over $5 or $10 million because it's
sophisticated.
right.
Exactly.
She says, and they have like millions in the bank, right? Yeah. But because she's like an older lady who runs toys, the agent literally doesn't call her back. This still happens today in commercial property. So the agent's like, so you're a beauty therapist, you want to buy this property? Like,
not happening. Yeah.
Not happening. So he kind of said, here's a contract, thinking, oh, you know what, I'm just going to give you a contract, and this woman's just going to walk away and never see her again, right? So he gives me a contract and says, the first person who comes back with a signed contract for $360,000 gets the property. Now, there's a few people running on it. No other information, right? Just, so I was like, all right, I need to take this contract, and someone needs to read this contract. So I basically went to 3 solicitors. They was like, we can't read your contract today, Nearly with us. And when I got to the 3rd one, I was like, you know what, I'm not leaving today until you read this contract, right?
I like
and
it.
When you camp out someone's door and you don't know them, they just think you're a crazy Asian woman, and they just go, I'm never getting rid of this woman unless I read this contract. So I'm just going to read her contract. Right?
Just give it to me real quick. Yeah, exactly.
And so he kind of gave me the lowdown of, here's your lease, here's your tenant, here's what it is, and this is your cooling off, this is what it is. So I'm like, okay, got it, right? Now we need to sign the contract. And he's like, no, we can't sign the contract because you don't know anything about it. And I was like, but if I don't sign the contract, then I'm never going to get the property, right? And he was like, all right, well, I need to talk to your partner about it. I need to go through this. I need to go through the whole thing to make sure he covers off his liabilities. And he was trying to explain to me, this has got no cooling off period. And I said, look, I've been to law school, so I'm fine with all this stuff. And he's like,
I get it, yeah.
He's like, well, this person discovered Google and okay, so he's explained to me, I'm standing there, we get this signed off, right? And I'm driving literally and the agent's calling me, and he's thinking, okay, so this woman's never going to make it, right? So he's saying, so he says to me, look, when you've done the contract and you've signed off on the contract, just tell me you're coming. And I start to think, okay, so if he did have another buyer, is he going to alert the other buyer that I'm coming? So I didn't tell him, and I went and I basically drove to North Sydney, where this property is. Their solicitor was a few streets down, ran up to the office and literally handed them the contract with the day when they still had checks, and says, I'm ready to exchange contracts, right? And it was probably the most torturous half hour of my life as you went through each page of the contract in New South Wales, which is like 150 pages, and call the bank to see if the check would bounce, right? But I had actually beaten the previous buyer by 10 minutes, because when I left the office, they were sitting in the foyer.
Wow.
That's when I called the agent. He said, I think they've just exchanged contract. I said, yes, that would be with me. Yeah. And he was just like, what?
So serendipitous, I know.
And for me, which ended the day, I could have made so many mistakes, and that was a fluke, right? It was in the sense that I had done as much due diligence as I can on something I didn't know, right? I didn't know. And what drew me was ultimately the cash flow to have that gamble, right?
Yeah.
And because, again, I have no concept of these things, give it a go, right? How badly can it go wrong, right? This is my thinking. And that property's paid time and time again. But it actually got me thinking, just doing that one deal, how many people are in the same shoes as I am that just didn't know how to. And then after a year, I went out and duplicated that strategy and replaced 50K of my income. And being a beauty therapist, we're paying 50K back then with a lot of money, right? And you're thinking, okay, So this actually really works. And that's how it got me to thinking, okay, I need an education, I need to educate the market, I need to develop a product for this market, I need to help everyday Australians make a choice, right? And the choice is, you don't have to choose resi or commercial, you can have both, and you can make a choice starting out whether you want residential or commercial, right? And you should have that choice, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what drives me today.
No, it's good, and that first property sets you up for multiple properties after that, and then, you know, the desire to help others and help them succeed, especially at a time when a lot of the education was residential, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was no commercial property investors, and you know, I was the first commercial property speaker in Australia talking about commercial property. And people were just like, and accountants at back then were telling their clients, don't buy commercial property.
Wow.
Every time I had this block, right? And now accountants are sending clients over here saying, you need to go talk to Helen, you should invest in commercial property.
Yeah,
I was like,
absolutely. They hated cash flow and more taxes. That was probably the problem.
yeah, that's right. So yeah, I think that's enough
it's
about us.
It's an incredible journey. Yeah, it's amazing, and I think, like, you know, as we go through this, it'll be really good to leverage the skills that we bring and bring in specialists as well to really help provide a lot of the insights for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So tune in to check out more episodes on Beat the Market, where I'm going to share with you different professionals who are coming in from different spaces, and they're really top level professionals in their field to help you beat the market. That might be a particular twist, a particular idea that can really elevate you to the next level. And that's what this podcast is about. So make sure you subscribe, make sure that you spread the word, and make sure that you tune in for future episodes on how to beat the market.